A pregnant wife vanishes without a trace. Her millionaire husband and his mistress celebrate, convinced they've gotten away with everything. Until a chilling video surfaces and turns their world upside down. Lies unravel, alliances shatter, and the quiet woman they underestimated becomes their greatest downfall. Was it justice or the perfect revenge? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, emotional stories you won't believe are real. I used to believe that stillness meant safety. That if a house was quiet, it was peaceful. That silence was something soft. But I learned that silence can be sharp. It can be suffocating. And on that day, the day my husband walked into our pristine mansion and called my name into the empty air, silence became the sound of my freedom. The day I disappeared wasn't dramatic, not in the way people expect. There was no broken glass, no signs of struggle, no note, no goodbye, just stillness. A half-finished cup of tea on the kitchen island, a pair of ballet flats by the door. My phone, dead, resting next to a clutch and car keys I was supposed to take with me to a charity gala that evening. Everything looked undisturbed, too undisturbed. And that was exactly how I planned it. You see, for years I had lived in the echo of Evan Maddox's ambition. Our marriage, much like our glass-walled home perched above the California hills, was breathtaking on the outside, barren on the inside. People looked at us and saw elegance, wealth, success. I was the beautiful, educated wife. He was the tech mogul with charm and power. But behind those walls, I was fading. I was 7 months pregnant and felt more like a decoration than a person. I had spent so long trying to be the wife Evan needed, the woman who fit his narrative, that I didn't even recognize the sound of my own voice anymore. But I never stopped listening. I heard the way he spoke when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The phone calls he took late at night, his tones softening into something far too intimate. I saw the shift in his eyes when I entered the room, how he went from calculating to distant, like I was something to endure, not love. The change started subtly. One day, I noticed he didn't ask about the baby. Then, he stopped noticing whether I joined him for dinner. Eventually, he stopped looking at me at all. And then, one afternoon, while reviewing our household expenses, I noticed a transaction that wasn't like the others. A hotel charge. Not under our names. Not on our usual cards. Hidden through a shell company I didn't know existed, Apex Holdings. It was a boutique hotel in Beverly Hills. Elegant, discreet. The kind of place married men take women they don't plan to keep. I didn't confront him. Not right away. I smiled at him that night when he came home late. I asked about his day. I folded his jacket over the back of the chair and kissed his cheek. I needed more than suspicion. I needed certainty, and certainty came fast. The receipts started to line up. Phone records. A second device I found hidden in the glove box of his car. The lipstick I would never wear smudged on the edge of a glass I hadn't touched. The smell of her on his collar. Her name was Sabrina Voss. He was careful, but not careful enough. The moment I knew, truly knew, that I was in danger wasn't when I found the proof of the affair. It was when I finally brought it up. I stood in our kitchen, hands resting on my belly, and asked him, "How long have you and Sabrina been sleeping together?" He didn't flinch. "Don't do this," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "You're tired, emotional. You're 7 months pregnant. Be careful." I was. I always had been. "I want a divorce," I said calmly. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You'll get nothing," he said. "I'll paint you as unstable. You think anyone's going to believe the quiet little gallery girl over me? I have the best attorneys in the state. If you try to take my son or my money, Claire, I will make you disappear." That was the moment he stopped being my husband. That was the moment I knew I had to stop being his wife. From that day on, I became someone else. I started small, researching, learning. There's something empowering about anonymity on the internet, about becoming invisible while gathering power. I studied offshore banking, identity reconstruction, encryption. I reached out to a contact in Tel Aviv, someone from my old art world days who now specialized in personal transitions. I liquidated the annual art acquisition fund, Evan's one blind spot in our prenup, and used it to build the first pieces of a new identity. For months, I played the part of the obedient wife while constructing my escape in the quiet hours of the night. I memorized the blind spots in the home's security cameras. I mapped the patrol patterns of our private neighborhood's guards. I located a small private airstrip in the Mojave Desert and arranged a charter flight using an anonymous cryptocurrency transfer. Every detail was methodical, surgical, the kind of planning Evan respected. He just never thought it would be used against him. The day I vanished, I brewed a cup of tea and left it half-finished on the counter, the way I always did. I removed my wedding ring and placed it beside the clutch I was supposed to carry to the gala. I laid out the dress he liked best. I left everything immaculate, cold, perfect. And then I walked out the back door at precisely 3:15 p.m., just as Evan was meeting Sabrina at their hotel suite. I wore oversized sunglasses and an old hoodie, my belly hidden beneath baggy layers. The car that picked me up was paid in cash, driven by a man who didn't speak English and didn't need to. By the time Evan returned home that evening and called my name into the silence, I was gone. By the time he stood in the kitchen, confused by the untouched tea, the folded throw on the couch, the air too clean, too still, I was already watching the sun dip below a different horizon. I left behind a whisper, an echo, a trail just faint enough to stir questions, just deliberate enough to feel wrong. And it worked. I imagined the moment he realized the house was too perfect, that nothing was out of place, not even a fingerprint. I imagined the look on his face when he opened the walk-in closet and saw everything hanging exactly where it should be. When he saw my phone, dead. My car keys untouched, no sign of a struggle, no goodbye, just absence. He would be unsettled at first, then curious, then afraid. Not afraid for me, afraid for himself, because he knew I wasn't someone who left without a plan. And he was right. By the time Evan popped the cork on that bottle of aged scotch, I was already halfway over the Atlantic. He stood in the center of the study, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers like a man who had just sealed a merger, not lost his pregnant wife. I can still see it in my mind's eye, because I had rehearsed that image 100 times. The study was his sacred space, all dark wood, masculine lines, and the scent of leather-bound ego. It was the one room in that entire mansion that didn't feel like a showroom. It felt like him. And it was the perfect place for him to celebrate my vanishing act. Sabrina Voss leaned against the edge of his desk, her long legs crossed at the ankle, lipstick as red as blood. She wore arrogance like perfume, expensive, suffocating, and made to linger. She tilted her glass toward his, her voice low and dangerous. "To freedom," she whispered. He clinked her glass without hesitation. "To freedom." They sipped, savored, laughed. Not once did they question whether I might still be watching, because to them, I was the problem, the obstacle, the fragile little pregnant wife who wouldn't fight back. I had made it easy for them to believe I'd broken, left in a cloud of hormones and tears, disappeared like a ghost into the night. And they believed it, because they needed to. I had studied their patterns for over a year, watched the subtle glances across dinner tables, the carefully timed business meetings that always ended with him returning home with that particular scent clinging to his collar. Jasmine and heat. Sabrina. I hadn't confronted them when I first discovered the affair. I didn't scream, didn't throw a wine glass across the room. I smiled. I made his favorite tea. I played the role of the unknowing wife, so well in fact, that even I started to believe it. Until I didn't. The day I found the second phone, tucked into the glove box of his Aston Martin, vibrating with a text from SV, was the day I began to disappear. I didn't just vanish. I unraveled myself from his world thread by thread. I stopped being Claire Maddox, the gallery docent with the perfect posture and well-timed laughter. I started becoming Anya Novak, a woman who didn't need to be rescued, who didn't wait to be loved, who didn't ask permission to survive. While they were toasting to their imagined victory, I was somewhere over the Atlantic, seat reclined, a blanket pulled over my legs, one hand resting protectively on the curve of my stomach. I looked out the small airplane window, the clouds like soft ghosts below, and smiled. Not because I was free yet, but because they thought they were. That was the delicious part. Their confidence, their absolute certainty that they had won. I knew Evan. I knew that he would call the police not out of genuine fear or concern, but to control the narrative. The dutiful husband, the betrayed man, the wealthy, grieving father-to-be who just wanted answers. And Sabrina, always the strategist, would script her role as the concerned family friend, hovering near him just enough to plant herself in the public's favor without drawing suspicion. They were predators dressed as victims. But the hunt had been flipped. They didn't know I had left behind a trail, not of breadcrumbs, but of razors. Carefully placed evidence. Just enough to make the detectives question, to scratch away the polished surface of Evan's lies. The untouched teacup on the kitchen island, the lipstick-stained glass in the study's trash, the camera footage from our neighbor's deck, one I knew Evan never paid attention to, but I had seen the lens turn toward our house every morning at sunrise. That camera would capture the kiss, the one between Evan and Sabrina just hours after my disappearance, and that kiss would be the first crack in their story. Back in the study, Sabrina slipped off her heels and walked barefoot across the Persian rug. She unbuttoned the top of his shirt and rested her hand on his chest. "It's just us now," she said softly. "No more pretending." Evan pulled her close, kissed her like a starving man. He had no idea that every second of that moment, he was dancing on a grave he thought he'd dug, but hadn't, because I wasn't in the ground. I was in the air, high above their crumbling empire, with a new identity secured through offshore accounts, a passport stamped in Tel Aviv, and a private investigator who cost more than the entire nursery we never finished building. I didn't need revenge, I needed closure. But closure, I'd learned, doesn't come quietly. It has to scream. It has to be heard. That's why I filmed the video. I sat in my dressing room, 7 months pregnant, red-eyed and trembling, looking into the lens like I was staring directly into Evan's soul. I told the truth. But I told it like a woman who was already dead. I named names. I cited bank accounts. I begged the police to protect the child I might never get to hold. It was honest, emotional, and brilliantly timed, but I didn't send it. Not yet. The file sat in a secure cloud, encrypted and automated, set to release to the right journalist exactly 72 hours after I disappeared. Long enough for Evan and Sabrina to tighten the noose around their own necks. I didn't want to just run. I wanted the world to see them, to really see what they were when no one was looking. And they gave me the perfect ending. While Evan poured another round, Sabrina tossed her head back and laughed. "You really think they'll buy it?" she asked. "Of course they will," Evan said, smirking. "They always buy what I'm selling." The ice in his glass clinked like the toll of a bell. He didn't know the product this time was his own downfall, and I had been the one writing the pitch. I imagine Evan rehearsed every word in the mirror before he called 911. He was never one to wing things, not when it came to public image. Spontaneity made him sweat. Control was his native tongue. So when he finally picked up the phone and dialed, I could picture the tremble he forced into his voice, the precise breathless pause before the words. "My wife, she's pregnant. I think she's missing." I wasn't there to see it, but I know the stage. I built it. The foyer bathed in golden light, the keys still in the porcelain bowl where he tossed them with too much drama. The teacup, just barely touched, the faint scent of lavender still in the air. And the silence, that heavy, unnatural silence that even marble couldn't echo properly. He performed grief like it was theater. And in many ways, it was. He was both playwright and actor, feeding lines to himself as he paced through our house, waiting for the police, practicing the exact balance between composed and devastated. He would mention the baby, of course. The baby made him sympathetic. He would describe me as loving, organized, reliable. "She never just disappears," he'd say, voice cracking just slightly. "She had a gala tonight. She wouldn't miss it." I'm sure they believed him at first. Why wouldn't they? Evan Maddox was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, a self-made tech mogul with a pregnant wife and a spotless record. They saw tailored suits, a clean estate, a man struggling to hold it together. Not the predator underneath. He probably paced by the grand piano while he waited. He always lingered there when he wanted to seem thoughtful. And when the officers arrived, a man and a woman in pressed uniforms, I can imagine the look of concerned welcome on his face, the outstretched hand, the furrowed brow. "Thank you for coming so quickly." He walked them through the house like a grieving curator. Bedroom, untouched. Closet, nothing missing. Nursery, still unfinished. He described me like a ghost still lingering in the halls. She was here. She made tea. She was humming something. Maybe Mozart? She was excited about the baby. We were discussing names, lies, every word. We hadn't spoken in weeks beyond calendar logistics and polite morning greetings. He didn't know what I was reading. He hadn't touched my belly in days. He never asked if the baby kicked. But now, suddenly, I was everything to him. I watched the press conference 2 nights later from a rented flat on a different continent. Baby kicking gently beneath my sweatshirt, glass of lemon water sweating on the table beside me. The screen flickered as Evan stepped up to the microphone, dressed in a black suit, sleeves slightly wrinkled, just enough to suggest sleeplessness. A lock of his perfectly styled hair had been tousled for effect. He was good. "She is the love of my life," he said, his voice rough with rehearsed emotion. "She's carrying our child. My world is empty without her." Behind him, Sabrina stood in a conservative navy dress, her expression composed, her hand resting gently on his arm, the concerned family friend. Not the woman he'd kissed just hours after reporting me missing. Not the one who'd deleted texts and emails and carefully coached him through how to appear devastated without overacting. She knew how to play her part. They were beautiful, broken, believable. The media lapped it up like warm milk. But not everyone bought it. There was one man in that crowd who watched the cracks form beneath the gloss. Detective Marcus Hale, mid-50s, rumpled suit, the quiet eyes of someone who'd seen too many families lie straight to his face. He stood off to the side that night, arms crossed, not taking notes, just watching. I'd counted on someone like Hale. Not someone who would believe me, because I knew no one would at first, but someone who wouldn't quite believe him. Later, I learned he had started digging almost immediately. He pulled Evan's phone records, checked the neighbor's security feed, reviewed the timing of the 911 call down to the second. He interviewed the housekeeper who mentioned the perfume lingering in the study. Too bold to be mine. The wine glasses with the lipstick. The receipts from the hotel. And through it all, Evan kept the act going. He did interviews, held Sabrina's hand in the kitchen when reporters swarmed the gates, cried in the nursery when no one was looking but the cameras. He leaned into the role like he always had, with ego, precision, and just enough fake vulnerability to make the world lean in closer. But you can't act grief forever. Not when it's not yours. You slip, you get comfortable, you start believing your own lines. He did just that. I imagine by the 4th or 5th day, Evan started to relax. No body, no blood, no suspicious neighbors. He thought he'd made it through the storm. He started calling Sabrina by her real name again in texts, started pacing less and smiling more. They drank wine at night. He went back to shaving with care in the morning. That's the part that broke me when I thought about it. He got cocky. And that's exactly what I needed. Because the video was still waiting. Sitting quietly in the encrypted folder, time-stamped, named simply, "If something happens." I had recorded it in pieces, sitting in the dressing room where the light was soft, where my eyes looked as raw as I felt. No makeup, no script, just truth and a shaking voice that sounded like it came from someone already on the edge of the world. I spoke about Evan, about the threats, about the money, about Sabrina, about how I feared they were planning something. I named dates, accounts, motives. I cried, I begged, and then I closed the laptop and left it all behind. 3 days after I vanished, that video was released, automatically and without mercy, to a journalist known for cracking open tech world scandals. It was everywhere within hours. National, viral, headline after headline screamed betrayal, murder, secret mistress. The grieving husband became a person of interest. Sabrina's photo appeared side by side with mine, no longer a close friend, but a suspect. Evan hadn't just lost control of the narrative, he'd lost the stage. The world was no longer watching him with sympathy. They were watching him with suspicion, with scrutiny, with disgust. And me? I watched too. Not out of spite, but because I wanted to be sure. Because it wasn't enough to run. I needed the whole house of lies to burn. Detective Marcus Hale didn't speak much that first day. He didn't need to. While the uniformed officers walked through our house taking notes, asking rote questions and offering polite nods, Marcus just watched. He stood near the entrance of the living room with his hands folded behind his back, eyes scanning every corner, every reflection, every wordless space between Evan's polished responses. He looked out of place among the sleek lines and sterilized surfaces of the Maddox estate. His suit was a shade too old, his shoes worn, his tie slightly loosened as if he'd given up pretending to care about dress codes a decade ago. He had the weary air of a man who had seen far too many people cry wolf, far too many spotless kitchens scrubbed clean of the truth. And yet, nothing about him was tired. He watched Evan like a hawk disguised as a pigeon, quiet, still, unassuming, but always calculating. When Evan spoke, Hale nodded slowly, never interrupting, never rushing. But behind his kind eyes the gears were grinding. Evan didn't notice. He was too busy giving the performance of his life. I knew Hale would be the one. From the very start, I knew it would take a man like him, one who didn't trust tears, especially the rehearsed kind, to peel back the layers Evan had wrapped himself in. He didn't ask the obvious questions first. He asked for details no one else cared about. "What was she wearing that morning?" Hale asked. Evan blinked. "Ah, a sweater, I think. One of those maternity ones." "Color?" "I don't know. Pale, maybe. Something soft." Hale wrote that down, slowly, then looked up and said nothing. The silence made Evan twitch. He tried to recover. "She usually wears neutrals, you know. Comfortable clothes. She's 7 months pregnant. I'm not really keeping track of her outfits." "You said you had breakfast together?" "Yes, around 8:30. Just cereal. Coffee. She seemed fine. She was excited about the gala." "Did she seem anxious? Mention anything unusual?" "No." "No calls or messages after that?" "No. I figured she was resting. I got home and..." He let his voice trail off. It was like she'd just vanished. Another pause. Hale didn't move. "That's why I called her parents," Evan added quickly. "I thought maybe she'd gone there." "Your phone records will show that?" Evan's mouth opened, then closed again. "Yes, of course." Hale nodded, just once. He already knew it was a lie, because the first call Evan made after discovering I was missing wasn't to my parents. It wasn't even to the police. It was to Sabrina. A 7-minute call logged at 6:03 p.m., exactly 12 minutes before the 911 call was placed. I had counted on it. I had made sure the timestamps would bury him. What Hale didn't know yet, but would soon discover, was what else Evan had done that day. He didn't go to his office at 9 a.m. He didn't stay there for a board meeting until 5:30. His phone had pinged in Beverly Hills between 3:15 and 5:15, just blocks from a boutique hotel where Sabrina Voss maintained a standing suite under a corporate alias. And the cameras. Oh, the cameras. An elderly neighbor down the hill, a birdwatcher with a state-of-the-art security setup, had offered his footage to the police, not because he suspected foul play, but because he wanted to help. While scanning his camera feed for odd activity, he came across a familiar sight. The upper balcony of our home, clearly visible through the lens of his 800mm zoom. At 12:30 a.m., hours after Evan's dramatic 911 call, 2 figures were caught on tape, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other slender, wrapped in a silk robe that fluttered like a ghost in the wind. They kissed, not a hesitant embrace of grief-stricken friends. A passionate, lingering kiss. Detective Hale saw the footage, and that's when he knew. He didn't say a word to Evan about it, not yet. He wasn't ready to spring the trap, not until he had everything lined up. So he kept showing up, asking questions, looping back to reconfirm details, smiling politely at Evan's expensive lawyer while gently poking holes in his timeline with the precision of a man who knew where the rot was hiding. And it wasn't just Hale anymore. A young detective on his team, someone named Tessa Chen, started pulling digital threads. She traced Evan's call history, then Sabrina's. She followed payment trails, compared timestamps, requested surveillance from the hotel. It all lined up, like beads on a string, each one a small lie that, when connected, formed a noose. The press conference had only fueled the fire. On the surface, Evan's speech had drawn sympathy. A handsome, soft-spoken entrepreneur pleading for the safe return of his pregnant wife. But Detective Hale had watched it not with empathy, but with careful scrutiny. "The love of my life," Evan said. "My world is empty without her." Hale had muttered to Chen, "Check the number labeled SV in his contacts. I want cell tower data. Let's see how far apart they really were that day." And so they did. Meanwhile, Evan and Sabrina were getting comfortable again. Sloppy. They started celebrating in the study, again. A cleaner brought in to freshen the space found 2 wine glasses in the trash, both with lipstick. One of them a bold shade of red I never wore. They were so sure no one would look closely. But Hale was already digging. He didn't kick down doors, he didn't raise his voice, he let the weight of silence do the work. He let Evan fill in the gaps, badly. And when the moment was right, he called them both in. Separate interviews, neutral rooms, plastic chairs. Sabrina walked in with the poise of a woman raised on silk and private chauffeurs, designer handbag, diamond studs, calm expression. But when Hale slid the enhanced photo across the table, the one from the balcony, something cracked. Not enough to break her, but enough for him to see it, fear. That was all he needed. In the other room, Evan tried to stay composed. He had his lawyer beside him, but Hale knew how to work the room. He mentioned the 2-hour hole in Evan's alibi, the hotel suite, the wine glasses, the embrace. Evan started to sweat. "You weren't celebrating a business deal," Hale said, voice quiet but laced with iron. "You were celebrating that she was gone." And in that moment, the performance began to unravel. The mask slipped. The man who had once believed he controlled everything, money, image, people, was losing grip. And I was watching from far away, knowing that for the first time in his life, Evan Maddox had no script, only consequences. It didn't start with the lipstick-stained collar or some poetic trace of perfume left behind. No, the day everything truly shifted was the day I found a hotel charge on a corporate card Evan never told me existed. That was the thread I pulled, and it unraveled the whole damn tapestry. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. I was reviewing our household budget, something I'd done for years, dutiful, careful, the perfect wife with a perfect spreadsheet. But then I saw it. A charge from the Whitestone, a boutique hotel in Beverly Hills, elegant and discreet. The kind of place that didn't ask questions if your room had a second guest and your wedding ring was in your pocket. It wasn't one of Evan's usual business expenses. It was private, tucked into a statement for Apex Holdings, a subsidiary I'd never heard of, one that was supposedly dormant. It wasn't dormant at all. The transaction was dated the same weekend he told me he had flown to Seattle for a conference. I didn't confront him that night. I smiled. I made salmon with rosemary just the way he liked it. I asked him about his meetings. He kissed my cheek and told me I was glowing. Then he went to bed early, claiming exhaustion. I sat in the library, my laptop glowing in the dark, staring at the transaction again and again until I couldn't feel my hands. Something snapped in me. Not in a dramatic, movie-worthy way. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was something colder, sharper. A shift of tectonic plates. I knew what kind of man Evan was in business, how he wielded control like a scalpel, how he stripped people down to weakness and used it to his advantage. I had seen it in boardrooms and investor calls. And now, I realized he saw me the same way. Not as a wife, as an asset. And Evan Maddox never released an asset unless he could bleed value from it. The prenup made that clear enough. Ironclad, his lawyer had said. But Evan's pride had left a single crack, a clause he thought was insignificant, a yearly art acquisition fund in my name, separate from our joint accounts. Meant to make me feel independent, I suppose. In his mind, I was the art historian turned housewife who'd maybe buy a few watercolors and donate them to a local gallery. What he didn't anticipate was that I'd use those funds to hire someone who didn't appear on Google or LinkedIn. A man with no digital footprint, who spoke with a faint Israeli accent and didn't flinch when I handed him a file with photos, times, and names. He didn't ask why I wanted proof. He simply nodded and said, "You'll have what you need in 2 weeks." And I did. A dossier thicker than any novel I'd ever read. Photographs of Evan and Sabrina entering that hotel. Records of wire transfers from Apex Holdings to a shell account in Sabrina's name, over $200,000 in total. Dinner receipts, private jet manifests, encrypted messages between burner phones. Sabrina wasn't just his mistress. She was his accomplice. And Evan was paying her to stay quiet, to stay useful, to stay ready. I read every page. And then I sat in front of the mirror and looked at myself for a long time. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, pale, her belly round, hands resting on it protectively. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, a glint of steel. I wasn't a victim, not yet. The confrontation happened 2 days later. Calm, calculated, behind closed doors. I waited until he was shaving, standing shirtless in front of his bathroom mirror, steam curling around him like a ghost. "I know about the hotel," I said softly. He paused, The razor stilled. What hotel? The Whitestone. Last Friday, room 803. Sabrina ordered champagne. He turned toward me slowly. No panic, just a faint, amused smirk. You've been spying on me. I've been surviving you. A beat of silence. He rinsed the razor. You don't want to do this, Claire. You're right, I said. I don't want to, but I am. I'll bury you, he said, casually, wiping his face with a towel. You leave me? You get nothing. You'll never touch my money. You'll never see that baby again. And then he said the line that would haunt him forever. If you try to take my son or my money, I'll make you disappear before anyone finds out. He didn't shout. He didn't grab my arm. He didn't need to. The cold certainty in his voice was enough. It wasn't bluster. It was a plan. That night, I opened a new cloud folder on an encrypted drive. I named it, If You're Reading This. I sat down in my dressing room, placed a camera on the vanity, and hit record. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I didn't want to cry, but I needed to. So I told the truth. Not the full legal brief of it, but the version that would reach hearts. The trembling voice, the disbelief, the fear. I spoke to the lens like it was my only witness. I explained who Evan was, what he'd threatened. I detailed the affair, the money, the private accounts, the fake smiles. I named Apex Holdings. I said it slowly, carefully, so no one could mistake it. I asked whoever was watching to protect my son. I begged them not to let him fall into Evan's hands. And when it was done, I saved it. I wrote a short email addressed to a journalist who once broke a major tech corruption story. I scheduled it to send in 72 hours, password protected, with the link embedded. I logged out and destroyed the burner laptop. Every hour from that point on was war. I packed only what I needed: documents, ID, one bag of plain clothes. I mapped the security blind spots in our home months before, knew which cameras had dead zones. At 3 p.m., while Evan was at work, I walked through the back exit, sunglasses on, hair tied, belly hidden beneath an oversized sweater. The car was waiting, a rideshare paid in cash, driven by a man who asked no questions. He took me not to LAX, but to a small private airstrip in the Mojave. I didn't look back. The plane lifted off just before sunset. I remember staring down at the horizon, watching California shrink below me, a silent, glowing sprawl of glass and secrets. I had spent years being careful, soft-spoken, decorative. I had smiled through board dinners, flirted politely with investors, and whispered support into Evan's ear like a good wife should. But in the air, I let all of it fall away. Claire Maddox was gone, and what was left was me. The video dropped like a grenade in a silent room. 72 hours after I walked out of that house for the last time, the link went live. Sent from an encrypted cloud account, it landed in the inbox of a journalist named Mia Rosario, someone known not for gossip, but for torching billion-dollar reputations with a single exposé. She didn't bury the lead, she uploaded it. Within 2 hours, my tear-streaked face was playing on every screen across the country. The thumbnail alone was enough to make people click. A pale, exhausted woman, 7 months pregnant, trembling as she stared into a camera in a gleaming white dressing room. No filter, no polish, no edits, just truth. I began simply, "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone." And then I told them everything. I talked about the threats, the control, the betrayal. I laid bare Evan's affair with Sabrina, the hush money funneled through Apex Holdings, the hotel receipts, the secret phone calls. I even named the dates. I asked people to protect the baby. And then finally, I looked directly into the lens and said, "Don't let them get away with this. Not him. Not her." The silence afterward was deafening, but only for a moment. Then the world erupted. The story exploded across the media like wildfire on dry brush. Pregnant wife vanishes after accusing tech mogul husband of conspiracy. Secret mistress, hidden accounts, and a chilling final message. Claire Maddox speaks from beyond the veil. They called it a digital confession, a haunting testament of a woman trying to escape before it was too late. And Evan? He was caught in the middle of it, right where I wanted him. The press turned fast. One moment he was the grieving husband, a symbol of tragic loss. The next, he was a shadowed figure in a fast-crumbling fairy tale. His PR team released a bland, dismissive statement about fabricated allegations and deep concern for Claire's mental state. But no one was buying it. The video was too raw, too believable, too specific. Detective Hale, who had already smelled rot beneath Evan's polished surface, now had fuel to burn. With the video in hand, he secured a court order for Evan's financial records, targeting Apex Holdings and its trail of transactions. Within hours, his team traced hundreds of thousands in quiet wire transfers, most of it funneled into shell accounts linked to Sabrina. Then came the warrants. The house was searched again. This time with forensics, dogs, heat sensors. Every drawer was pulled, every laptop cloned. The nursery was photographed in sterile silence. Evan watched helplessly as his empire was peeled apart piece by piece. And while the police combed through his life, the world watched. Social media lit up with commentary. Former colleagues chimed in, recalling moments when Evan had seemed off or lost his temper unexpectedly. A woman from a tech conference posted that he had cornered her after an afterparty and made her feel deeply unsafe. His board of directors issued a statement expressing shock and concern. Stock prices for Maddox Technologies dropped by 17% in one day. Sabrina, who had once draped herself in mystery and power, was photographed leaving a private yoga class, visibly shaken, sunglasses hiding her face, reporters shouting questions about her involvement. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. But it wasn't just public opinion that shifted. It was the weight of the evidence. The neighbor's footage, the one from the balcony, was confirmed. The timestamp matched perfectly. 12:30 a.m., hours after Evan reported me missing. The figures were grainy, yes, but unmistakable. The height, the posture, the curve of her waist against his chest. It was passion, not panic. Then came the wine glasses. 2 of them, found in the study's trash can by a cleaner Evan thought wouldn't notice. Both had lipstick, one a familiar pale pink, the other a deep, rich crimson that screamed Sabrina. Detective Hale brought them both in. Evan sat in a stark interrogation room, stone-faced, dressed in gray slacks and a black sweater. He had his lawyer with him. Of course he did. But Hale didn't need a confession, he just needed pressure. "There's a 2-hour gap in your timeline," Hale said, flatly. "You say you were in meetings, but your phone says otherwise. You were in Beverly Hills, at the Whitestone, with her." Evan's jaw tightened. His lawyer raised a hand. "My client is not obligated." "Sure," Hale interrupted. "But jurors ask questions too, like why a man calls his mistress before he calls 911. Like why he's kissing her on a balcony the night his pregnant wife disappears." No reply. "We've got the wire transfers, the lipstick, the footage, and now we've got the motive, straight from your wife's mouth." Still nothing. But Evan's face said it all. It wasn't just the fear. It was the disbelief. He truly thought he'd buried me so well that I'd never speak again. He never imagined I'd speak louder. At the same time, Sabrina sat in another room, her expensive coat folded neatly on the chair beside her. She looked thinner, older somehow. She didn't smile, didn't flirt. She just stared straight ahead as Hale slid the photo of the balcony kiss across the table. "That's not me," she said. "Sure," Hale replied, deadpan. "And those wine glasses in his study? One just happened to match your favorite shade of lipstick." She said nothing. "You helped him plan this," Hale continued. "We have bank records, emails, and now, thanks to Claire, we have a very public motive. You're not just the mistress anymore. You're part of the conspiracy." That word, conspiracy, hung heavy in the air. Her nails dug into her palm. Her voice, when it came, was icy. "She's manipulating you. She's manipulating everyone." "Maybe," Hale said. "But here's the thing. She's not here. You are." Sabrina folded her arms across her chest. But Hale could see it. Beneath the anger, beneath the practiced cold, was panic. Because she knew what I had done. I hadn't just escaped. I had dismantled the illusion, piece by piece, brick by brick. And all they had left was a house full of lies and a ghost that refused to stay buried. I watched the fallout unfold from a quiet apartment overlooking a Croatian harbor. The air smelled of salt and lemon trees. I was 6 months into a new name, a new life. The woman on the news, the woman sobbing in a white marble dressing room, felt distant. But not gone. I didn't smile, not yet, because the trap was only halfway sprung, and I wanted to watch them fall into it with their eyes wide open. For 3 days, Evan and Sabrina lived like they were waiting for the sky to fall. And it finally did. The night the arrest warrants came through, the air around their world changed. It wasn't visible, not at first. Not to their lawyers, their inner circle, or the hollowed-out shell of the press that still clung to due process. But Evan felt it. The walls were shrinking, The questions were getting sharper. Sabrina was sleeping less, drinking more. Their calls became frantic, whispery things exchanged in the dead of night, always in hushed tones, always behind locked doors. "He knows," Evan hissed during one of those calls, hiding in the pantry of our once pristine house, now turned into a war zone of forensic dust and boot prints. "Detective Hale knows everything." "No," Sabrina snapped, her voice low but urgent. "He has suspicions, that's all. He doesn't have a body, no murder weapon. He doesn't even know where you were after 5:15. He's watching us. Let him. It's all circumstantial. They can't prove anything." But doubt had already settled in Evan's bones, and it was starting to show. The arrogance that once lined his every gesture had faded into something much more familiar. Fear. Not fear of prison. Not exactly. Fear of exposure. Of being stripped bare in front of the world he had spent his whole life crafting like a designer brand. And now, that brand was unraveling faster than even his PR team could contain. Business meetings were canceled. Investors distanced themselves. Partners stopped returning his calls. His face, the golden boy of Silicon Valley, was now the punchline to late-night monologues. The headlines didn't just whisper anymore. They screamed. Claire's video sparks federal investigation into murder-for-hire plot. From CEO to suspect, the fall of Evan Maddox. Sabrina wasn't doing much better. Her father, a man obsessed with legacy and image, had reportedly flown in from Geneva for a family emergency. He walked into her Manhattan apartment, took one look at the chaos, and said, "You've embarrassed us." Then he turned around and flew back out the same night. But Hale wasn't interested in their shame. He was interested in their pressure points. And he found them. The true break came not from a new piece of surveillance or a sudden witness. It came from the one thing Sabrina never planned for. Being abandoned. Her support system, once wide and glittering, collapsed overnight. Friends ghosted her. Lawyers began dropping her calls. Her father froze her accounts. The lifestyle she had always weaponized, luxury, proximity to power, glamour, was now a liability no one wanted to touch. And Hale, he made sure she felt it. When she was called back in for a follow-up interview, she didn't wear the sleek navy dress this time. She wore a gray sweater and jeans. No makeup. Her eyes were puffy. Her voice was hoarse. "I have nothing to say," she told Hale, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "That's a shame," he replied, pulling out a manila envelope. "Because your boyfriend, he's about to say quite a lot." He didn't even need to bluff. Back at the detention center, Evan was unraveling on his own timeline. After hours of tight-lipped silence and high-priced legal advice, he finally caved under the weight of what he now understood to be inevitable. "We were celebrating," he told Hale. "We weren't planning anything. Claire left. She left us." Hale just stared at him. "You mean to tell me, on the night your pregnant wife disappeared, after she confronted you about your affair, you coincidentally decided to share whiskey and a kiss with your mistress in the same house? No concern? No panic?" Evan blinked, then shrugged, trying to summon that old charm. It didn't work anymore. "She left. People leave." "Sure," Hale said, "and sometimes they leave behind a digital confession that lights up every newsroom in America." Evan shifted, realizing too late that every sentence he spoke only cemented the image of him the world now saw. Cold, careless, guilty. Still, Sabrina held out, longer than I thought she would. She tried to summon her old poise in every meeting with her legal team. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a courtroom to collapse on itself and apologize. But that never came. Instead, her lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne with shark eyes and a sense of self-preservation sharper than his jawline, laid it out for her in black and white. "They have the video," he said, sliding a printed still of my tear-streaked face across the table. "They have the money trail, the lipstick, the security footage, the hotel logs, the call history, and they have him," he added, meaning Evan. "He's cracking." Sabrina didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the photo. Her face twitched, just slightly. The kind of flicker that only happens when someone realizes their entire world is no longer negotiable. "You have one option," Thorne continued. "You testify against Evan. You become the manipulated girlfriend. Say he lied to you. Say you were caught up in his power. Say he threatened you too. And if I don't, you'll die in prison." Silence. "Then, he told me she wouldn't fight," Sabrina whispered. He said Claire didn't have it in her, that she was small. Thorne didn't reply. He didn't need to. Sabrina folded, just like I knew she would. That evening, Evan was informed of her betrayal. He sat in a holding room, wrists chained to the table, flanked by 2 armed officers. His lawyer delivered the news like a man announcing the weather. "She's cooperating," he said. "She's giving them everything." And just like that, the last pillar beneath Evan's illusion cracked and collapsed. I imagine he didn't scream. Evan was never the screaming type. He probably just stared blankly at the wall, the weight of it all finally sinking in. Not just that he had lost, but that the person he burned his life for had sold him out at the first whiff of prison air. Sabrina, for all her fire and elegance, was a survivor. She didn't go down with anyone. She found the lifeboat and pushed Evan into the waves without hesitation. And me? I watched it unfold from a small whitewashed villa overlooking the Adriatic. My son stirred gently in my belly, nearly full term now, his kicks like reminders of everything still ahead. The news came in on my tablet. A live stream showed Sabrina walking into a federal building, flanked by lawyers, her expression grim, her mouth set in a line. "Star Witness," the chyron read. The internet was ablaze. Commentators dissected her choice like it was sport. True crime podcasts released emergency episodes. People debated whether she was a victim, a villain, or something in between. But I didn't care how they defined her. I cared that she cracked. And now, the final move was mine. Because while they were busy surviving the fallout, I was thriving in its ashes. A few weeks later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy in a quiet hospital with open windows and the scent of lemon trees. I named him Miles, after the man who never stopped asking questions, and I held him, my heart steady, my breath calm, my world finally my own. I didn't just disappear. I reappeared as someone they never saw coming. The room was quiet, save for the distant sound of gulls and the rhythmic hush of the sea brushing against the harbor walls. A breeze moved through gauzy curtains, carrying with it the scent of salt, lemons, and sun-warmed stone. I sat on the balcony, barefoot, a blanket draped over my legs, my son nestled against my chest. He was sleeping soundly, his tiny mouth parted slightly, one hand curled into a soft fist against my skin. His name was Miles. And in that moment, he was the only thing that mattered. We were safe. We were free. 6 months had passed since I became Claire Maddox for the last time. Since I left behind the mansion, the cameras, the marble floors that echoed every breath like a threat. Since I buried the past not with violence, but with truth sharpened to a razor. Evan had underestimated many things, my intelligence, my resilience, my capacity for pain, but above all, he had underestimated my ability to vanish while making sure the world never forgot me. He hadn't seen the storm coming. He never saw me as the storm. The news still made its way to me, even here, where time felt slower, where the world spun at a gentler rhythm. The trial was months away, but the verdict had already been written in the minds of the public. Sabrina's testimony had sealed it. She told the court everything, or at least everything that made her look like the unwilling accomplice of a cold, manipulative man. She cried at the right moments, wore pale colors, and called Evan a monster. And Evan? He sat in the courtroom like a broken statue, jaw clenched, skin ashen, his once iconic confidence replaced by a glassy-eyed disbelief that this was where it had all led. No one remembered him as the mogul anymore. He was no longer a tech genius or a magazine-cover darling. He was a villain, a cautionary tale, a hollow man brought down by the woman he thought would never raise her voice. The irony wasn't lost on me. There were moments, in the quiet hours after feeding Miles or watching the boats rock gently in the harbor, when I would let myself think of Evan, not out of love, not even out of hate, but out of study. He had built a life on the assumption that he could control everyone and everything. That money was loyalty, and silence was devotion. He treated me like a glass ornament, lovely, delicate, expensive, and utterly disposable. He thought he could destroy me with whispers and shadows, that if I disappeared quietly enough, no one would question it. But I had planned too long, too carefully. I had lived in his world, learned its rules, and then rewritten them. Every legal thread, every financial document, every security blind spot, I'd mapped it all while smiling across dinner tables and pretending not to notice the scent of another woman on his coat. I didn't run from Evan. I led him into his own ruin. The house was gone now, seized as evidence. The accounts were frozen. The company he built had expelled him. His name no longer opened doors. It closed them. Even his family, distant and image-obsessed, had distanced themselves with a carefully worded statement about shocking revelations and the pain of betrayal. And Sabrina, her plea deal ensured a lighter sentence, but she would never live freely again. Her name was poisoned, her world dismantled. But I didn't think of them often. Not anymore. Now I thought of Miles, of the life I was building for him, piece by piece, in a sun-drenched town that asked no questions. My identity, Anya Novak, was secure. The papers were real, the history solid. Thanks to my investigator, I had a passport, a birth certificate, even a digital footprint stretching back years. No one here knew who I had been. They only saw a quiet young mother who had moved from somewhere vague, with tired eyes and a baby who laughed easily. There were new routines, morning walks along the cliffside paths, afternoon naps on linen sheets, evening markets where I bartered for olives and cheese and fruit. At first, it had all felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's dream. But eventually, the quiet stopped feeling like absence. It started feeling like peace. Sometimes at night, when Miles was tucked into his bassinet and the sea breeze curled around the windows, I would light a candle and play the video again. Not all of it, just the first few seconds. If you're watching this, my voice said, thin and cracking, it means I'm gone. And then I would pause it, because I wasn't. I wasn't gone. I was more alive than I had ever been. They had built their future on the assumption that I was weak, that I would fold, that I wouldn't dare fight back. They looked at my soft-spoken nature, my quiet routines, my gentle hands, and they mistook them for surrender. They thought motherhood would make me docile. That pregnancy would keep me afraid. They didn't understand that every kick inside me had been a drumbeat of resolve. That every moment they lied, I was taking notes. I didn't set out for revenge. I set out for freedom. And in doing so, I'd burned their world to the ground. Miles stirred, making a soft sigh in his sleep, and I pressed a kiss to the top of his head. He had my eyes, my mother's mouth. He would grow up with stories of art and oceans, of bravery and dignity, not of secrets and silence. I would teach him to listen to the quiet, but not to fear it, because silence, when chosen, is power. I stood and carried him inside, the air cooling as twilight settled over the town. Somewhere far away, Evan was staring at a gray wall in a concrete cell, and Sabrina was preparing for a life that would never look like the one she'd imagined. And me? I was holding a future they had tried to erase. Let them tell my story however they want. A victim, a villain, a ghost. I knew the truth. I had written every word. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. It wasn't just a tale of betrayal and escape. It was a story of resilience, of a woman who refused to be erased. If there's one lesson we can take from Claire's journey, it's this. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and still shakes the world. We live in a world where appearances often deceive, where power can silence truth, but only for a while. In the end, truth always finds a way. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it does, it hits like a tide no lie can withstand. Now, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? What part of the world are you in? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you feel something, please consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next powerful, true-to-life story we share. There's more to come, and sometimes the most unforgettable voices belong to those we almost didn't hear.